Hello for everyone who's joining us for our May Preservation Month activity. I'm Britton Bostick. I'm the Downtown and Historic Planner for the City of Georgetown. So I get to have the coolest job in a really wonderful city that I deeply care about. We're going to get started with our presentation. So if you are joining us online, you can use the Q&A tool on the right side of your screen to type in some questions. That way I can know if you've got questions or need additional information. If you have a question that I can't answer today, I'll see if I can answer it next week in our next Monday's presentation. If you're joining us on the phone, you can ask questions when we get to the Q&A portion, and we'll have a time to do that. Otherwise, you can stay muted on your smartphone. You can mute yourself, or you can press *6 if you're calling in from a regular phone. So I'm going to take you through some of the fun resources that we have in the city of Georgetown, some of the cool things that I get to use every day, but these are things that are also available to everyone else. So I wanted to be able to share some of that as part of Preservation Month, and then as we go on through the month, we'll be sharing additional information, and I get to tell a few stories about our wonderful historic properties and historic structures. So this is the planning department. We are located just west of the Georgetown Public Library, right across from City Hall. And so we're in the very cool historic Light and Water Works building. It's a red brick building, kind of low, and our department front door is a big white door that faces the little drive-through alleyway. So easy to park and come see us if you need to. And we handle a lot of the development permits and applications and questions and support for our community. We do have a lot of online resources available. Here's my front door right here. If you ever need to come see me or need to come see someone in the planning department. But to get started, we have some great websites that you can check out while we're all still at home doing a lot more online than maybe we normally do. So the main page for my work and the information that I get to share out is historic.georgetown.org. Hopefully that's where you got started for this presentation today, but there's a lot of information there, and we'll go through some of that today. How you can find out more about historic properties, how you can see what the requirements are if you need a certificate of appropriateness. There are links to other parts of the planning department's work, including housing. We have a housing coordinator. Her name is Susan. She does really excellent work, and she's got some excellent resources to assist community members with housing needs. And so also planning.georgetown.org, that's the main page for our department. That's where you can go if you need contact information, how to get hold of us. We are not open to the public at this point in time. We'll probably be opening really soon, but we are still all working, and we are still available to you via phone and email. And so go to planning.georgetown.org for that. You can also go to maps.georgetown.org if you want to see one of the really excellent maps our GIS department supports. One of those I'll be showing you today. And then if you're ever curious about what's on the agenda for a public meeting, for our Historic and Architectural Review Commission, for example, or for City Council or for the Planning and Zoning Commission, you can go to agendas.georgetown.org. You'll see a list of all the meetings that are scheduled, and then you can click on the links to access the information and support materials for those. Also information on where that meeting's being held. We are currently hosting public meetings online. We're doing that virtually in order to comply with public health directives and to stay safe. And so I didn't know if you knew this, but you can actually watch the meetings that we're having right now from home. Or if you do need to give public comment, there are instructions on how to do that there. And so housing.georgetown.org, that's another excellent resource if you have questions about housing, if you've heard about our housing repair program and want some information there. That's really fun. So here's me, my first day at work in this job as the city's historic planner. I'm the downtown and historic planner, so my work covers the 2 historic districts that we have. We have a primarily commercial historic district, our downtown, and then we have a primarily residential district, Old Town. So if you need to get hold of me, please feel free to call 512-930-3581. That's how you can get me by phone, or britton.bostick@georgetown.org. So Historic Preservation Month, what are we doing? Why do we have this? What is this about? historic preservation really started in a couple of places in the United States. It started with Mount Vernon. There was a group of ladies who were very concerned with George Washington's home and the state of disrepair it had fallen into. And they were very concerned that the home of our nation's first president was not being kept up well, that it was in disrepair and was deteriorating. And they were really passionate and passionately interested about maintaining that home as this important kind of milestone of American history, this important place with a memory and important associations. And so a lot of times historic preservation in the United States is tied back to the Mount Vernon Ladies Association is the real first kind of attempt. But a lot of people don't know that another very early historic preservation effort was actually the Alamo. Again, women were very concerned with the deterioration of this structure. This was such the Alamo today is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's got these incredible international cultural designations for its importance to Texas history. And so, but it was really women who kind of saw this really important place in disrepair and thought, you know, we can't let this happen. We can't lose this. We need to protect this. And that's where historic preservation got started. And so it was really formalized at the national level in 1966, another Texas connection. President LBJ signed the National Historic Preservation Act. And then in 1973, Preservation Week got started in order to kind of honor and recognize the preservation efforts that were being made and the kind of the goals of preserving places. In the middle of the 20th century in the US, the international style, or what we call modern with a capital M, had become really, really popular. These were sleek buildings with concrete and steel and glass, and it really moved away from the traditional wood and brick and stone buildings that people had built with for a long time. And so this post-war construction was just a very different thing, and that was what was very fashionable at the time. And a lot of that activity, the building of highways, was causing us to lose a lot of old buildings and a lot of old neighborhoods and a lot of old places. And so in the 1960s, and it really started to gain speed in the 1970s and the 1980s, Americans really started to focus on historic preservation efforts. And that's why we celebrate this today. So Preservation Month became kind of a concerted effort by the National Trust for Historic Preservation in 2005. And so we are a certified local government, which means that we actively practice historic preservation. We're engaged in a certified local government program with the state of Texas in order to protect our historic resources. And as part of that, we celebrate every May as Preservation Month, and we do an activity. And so this year we are moving to online activities. And that'll go through the rest of the month. But also, if you want to see more about that, you can go to savingplaces.org, and they have a lot of great online content through the month that you can check out if you're interested in learning more about that. So our first really cool resource that I want to share with you, and something that I just get really excited about and enjoy so much. This is something that people who were in my position before me worked on, so I just get to enjoy the benefit of this. But we have a map that lists and identifies all of the historic properties in the city of Georgetown. And this is the coolest thing. And so if you open up this map, and I'll show you in just a minute how you get to that. If you open up this map, you will get to see a bunch of dots. And these dots tell you a lot of information immediately, but you can also click on the dot and it'll give you more information about that specific building. And so what I'm showing you on this PowerPoint slide right now, you can see the courthouse kind of on the upper right. That's the Williamson County Courthouse. It's right there in the middle of the courthouse square. And you can see some buildings on the west side of the square toward the middle. They've got a bunch of red dots on them. And the red dot means it's a high priority structure, or it is a historic structure that has a lot of architectural integrity or a lot of architectural importance. Usually these are the buildings that people really put a big investment into. And these are the fancier buildings. These are oftentimes the buildings from the Victorian period, the late 1800s to the early 1900s, that we really prize and value here in Georgetown, because that's when we had a big building boom. And then you can see some of the buildings have green dots on them, and that's medium priority structure. So they may not be quite as fancy, or they may have had more changes over time, but still very important. And then low priority is the blue dot. And low priority doesn't mean not important. It just means that maybe this is a historic structure that's had a lot of changes over time, or maybe this is a historic structure that was pretty plain and simple to begin with. And so that's really important information when we consider what the requirements are for design approval. If you're doing a project on a building in the historic district, if you're building a new building, we look at that. And so this rating system is not to say that any of these buildings are non-important, but it's just a way to evaluate how you go through the process to do a project and what that review looks like. And so this is just a super fun way to have a look at historic properties. Also on this map, you can see on the right, there's a layer list. And if you can check those boxes on and off to turn on and off different layers. It's an interactive map. And so that is one of the first things that I do when someone contacts me and says, hey, I'd like to do this project. I'm interested in doing some work, or maybe I want to make an addition, or hey, I'm just not sure about this building. This is a historic property. What do I need to know, or how can I find out information? This is kind of the first place that I go to. And so I'll just take you on a little tour of that map as we go on, but this is a really great, our historic properties map. So when you logged on to the historic.georgetown.org, you saw at the very top our Historic Preservation Month. You saw the link to get onto this webinar, and then just below that, there's a picture of a map with dots on it. All you have to do is click on that picture, and it'll send you straight to the map. And up in the left-hand corner, you can search by address. So if you live in one of the historic districts, or you live in a historic home, that's a quick and easy way that you can find out information about your property. Or if you're doing some research, you can find out some information too. So moving on, we do also have this really great collection of historic photos. And a lot of people don't know that these are all housed on the city's website. So if you go to records.georgetown.org, there's a way to get to those historic photos. And then you can see in the little menu I have here in historic collections, there's downtown around the year 2000, downtown around 1980. The 1980 photos are great, not only because the vehicles are really fun, but they tell a very different story than the downtown that we have today. The 1980s is when the Main Street program started. And the Main Street program, which we still enjoy today, is still just a wonderful program that we have in Georgetown. We're one of around 90 cities in Texas that are part of this program that partners with the state. But this is to support small business. It's to support great, healthy downtowns. And so before that all got started, we had a lot of boarded up windows, and our downtown wasn't in quite as good a shape as it is today. So those are some fun things to look at. And then the historic photos is where I go a lot, but you can also look at people, places, things, and events. But historic photos is where I tend to do the most research when I'm trying to understand the history of a property. So the City of Georgetown Library, the library has just started to open back up. And so I use the library a lot, and I'm really fortunate that my office is located right next door. It makes it easy for me to pop over to the second floor. So if you've ever been to the Georgetown Public Library, you know we have an excellent library. We have an award-winning library, and I feel very fortunate to be in a community that has such a strong library program. One of my favorite things about the library is that if you go to the second floor and you go kind of up the stairs and to the right and past the circulation desk, there's a room kind of over near where the used books are. There's a room called the Texas Room. And Clara Scarborough is a woman who's written a lot about the history of Georgetown. Her history is tied to the Williamson County Sun, and so wonderful resources there. Clara has just done a lot of the homework that supports the work that I do today, and I'm so appreciative of that. But in that room, there is a lot of material that you can find, including historic photos. So if you walk in the door, go straight to the back wall, there is a full bookshelf that has histories of Georgetown. It has color slides from the 1984 Historic Resource Survey. So that's really fun. I use those quite a bit when I'm presenting information to our Historic and Architectural Review Commission. And then you'll see two low gray filing cabinets. If you open up those filing cabinets, there are, on the left, there are folders. You have to be really careful to keep them in order, but there are folders about our historic properties that contain information. Sometimes people have done additional research for properties, and that's included there. That's part of Preservation Georgetown's collection that they've graciously shared with the public. And then in the right side, there are some binders with some incredible black and white photos of Georgetown They go all the way back to the 1880s. And so if you have some time or want to do a research project, I think it's really great for school-age kids. If you want to do a project on the history of Georgetown or what happened in Georgetown back in the day, that's a really great thing to do. And so check that out. And then also the Williamson County Historical Commission has got information on their website. And then also just to let you know other interesting historic things that are going on this month, the Williamson Museum is doing some really fun videos on their social media. Through their Facebook page, they're doing Facebook Live. So the Williamson Museum is doing some really fun videos and sharing information about the history of Georgetown and historic information more broadly. And so I highly recommend checking that out. Downtown development is something that it's part of my job to understand the history of and to know the history of, because in order for us to take good care of the buildings that we have today, it's important to know where they came from, sometimes why they're here, who built them or who operated there. And we have some really fun online resources that can help us understand that. I get to do this a lot because it's my job, but you can also do this from home if you're interested in knowing more about Georgetown, whether you've been here for a long time. And sometimes people say, hey, I think I remember that there used to be this store here, or my grandmother told me that she used to go here to this store. And so there are ways for us to see those places back through time. Another thing, we have so many new people in our community. A lot of people have chosen to move to Georgetown. We have such a great quality of life. We have such a friendly, welcoming community, and a lot of people want to be here. This is a great way for people who are new to our community to connect to Georgetown, to our history, and to how we got here. So one of my favorite photos is on the right. It's a photo of Georgetown around 1885. So if you can imagine, at one point somebody got high enough up to take this photo, and they were able to see the courthouse back on the right. You can see some houses. Today these are in our Old Town Historic District, and you can see people had pretty big yards, and they have these really beautiful, this is kind of when the Victorian period was really going in Georgetown. So these houses are for the most part of a particular style. In the back, you can see this tall cylinder. That was the water tower. It was brand new at the time. So that was how Georgetown was supplied with water. And you can see the streets were dirt. And one of the things that you can't see that is very different today is that where are the trees? If you were to take the same photo today, looking at the same angle, it would be difficult to see these houses because there would be so many trees. And so Georgetown was built kind of out of the prairie. And when Georgetown was started in 1848, but even as late as 1885, you can see we didn't have the big, beautiful trees that we have today that we love so much in Old Town. And so people were really just getting started planting those. And that's kind of a fun thing to notice. You can see a lot of little buildings scattered around. Those are barns and sheds and chicken coops, maybe where a cow had some shelter, because people often had small farms or small gardens and livestock areas even within their yards, because you just kind of did it all on your own property. And you can see they have these really beautiful fences too. So this is a photo that's available in the Georgetown Public Library in the magic drawer that I mentioned that has the folders with the historic photos. That's where that came from. On the left, this is a copy of the original deed for Georgetown. And so a lot of people don't know this. Georgetown got founded 1848, Williamson County 1848. And the whole reason this came about is because Texas' original counties were really pretty big a lot of times. Milam County is kind of the original county that Williamson County used to be in and was carved out of. Milam County went all the way to the Panhandle. So you can Google it really quick. You can see Texas original counties. Milam County was huge. And people in Milam County got really tired of having to go so far to go to the Milam County Courthouse to go do business. And it's a little bit north of here. And so they said to the Texas legislature, hey, can we have our own county? Because we don't want to have to go so far to go to the county courthouse and do our legal business. So the Texas legislature said, that's fine. They carved, I'm telling a very short version of this, but they carved Williamson County out of Milan County, and it got its own county seat. And that was going to be Georgetown. But in order to get Georgetown and in order to fund this brand new county, the county had to make money somehow. So George Washington Glasscock and Thomas Hewling, and Thomas Hewling didn't really get anything out of this deal. I'm not sure how he didn't get any naming rights, but Thomas Hewling and George Washington Glasscock said to a man named Greenleaf Fisk, who is the brand new Williamson County judge, we will sell you a bunch of land for $1, and then you can sell that land to fund the new county government. And all we want for it is $1, and you have to name the town after Mr. Glasscock. And that's how we became Georgetown. It was named after George Washington Glasscock for selling many, many acres, well over 100 acres to the county for just $1, which even at the time that was nothing. And so the county judge, Greenleaf Fisk, then began to sell off all of that land, and that included our downtown. So our downtown really got started with this 1849 deed in which the county owned all of the property and began to sell it off. And it was divided into blocks, and the streets were laid out, and the courthouse was kind of shortly put in the middle. And that land very quickly grew in value. So several, over 100 acres, if I remember correctly, were sold for that $1. And then after that, even half a block of land would be sold for $70. And then within a few years, you were seeing land sales for $400 to $800. And so the value very quickly escalated as people wanted to be part of Georgetown and to be able to build and develop both houses and these commercial buildings. So a little bit about how Georgetown got founded, how it got started, and the building boom kind of went on from there. So to follow up on that, we have a great resource that I use a lot that is housed actually in the UT library system. So the University of Texas has Sanborn fire insurance maps for a lot of cities in Texas, and they wonderfully for us have put these online. They're scanned copies. We are missing one for Georgetown. There is a 1925 map that the UT libraries have. They have the hard copy, they have the actual map, but they haven't scanned it yet because they haven't gotten around to it. And so at some point, it's kind of on my long-term to-do list when we're able to get back out, when we're able to go visit libraries and collections again, is to go have a chat with them and see if I can get a copy of the 1925 map. But so far, you have to go visit it in person, and that's at the Perry Castaneda Library on the UT Austin campus. So if you go to legacy.lib.utexas.edu/maps/Sanborn/G, you will get to where my slide is showing, or you can just Google Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps Texas, and it'll give you a link. And then you can see, like I said, a lot of cities in Texas. Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps were created because there was a fairly high risk that a town would burn from fire. And these maps and this this insurance effort was meant to record information that would help determine how fire resistant a community was, or what was the likelihood that if there was a fire, it would be a big disaster, kind of a catastrophic level disaster. And so you get these hand-drawn maps, hand-colored maps that are beautifully detailed. The level of detail does vary from community to community. Some cities paid extra for additional detail, some didn't. So Georgetowns are not the most detailed of the maps in Texas, but they do provide a pretty high level of detail, including awnings. We have addresses. We know what businesses were in the buildings at the time. And so we have maps that go all the way back from 1885 up to 1916. And then, like I said, there's a 1925 map that there's a hard copy. I haven't been able to find a digital copy, so if you know of one, please let me know. But you can click on these links that you can see listed here, and it'll show you all the different maps. And so I focus a lot on the downtown area, and you can see different colors in these maps. So everything that's yellow is a wood structure. The blue is a brick structure or a stone structure, some kind of masonry. And then orange in the middle for the courthouse is kind of because it was very special. This is our current courthouse. This is our 5th courthouse. A lot of people might think that we have the original courthouse, but this is actually kind of later on in the iterations of courthouses. This was constructed around 1910 by kind of a designed by a very prestigious architecture firm. And I believe for this one, the contractor was out of Beaumont. And so we have this like very wonderful courthouse now, and you can see it's colored orange. And that just signifies some of the kind of very modern technology that they had used. It's like concrete floors, concrete structure, things that were considered a lot safer from fire. And there are examples of towns in Texas that did have really catastrophic fires. Paris, Texas is kind of the most famous or infamous. They had a really disastrous fire in 1915 that burned down the majority of the town, including the downtown. And the only, I think, 3 buildings survived that fire. They were all brand new buildings that were built of brick and concrete and didn't have wood parts that could burn very easily. And then also not that long ago, just a few years ago, the city of Waxahachie experienced a catastrophic fire in their downtown. They've got beautiful kind of Victorian period wood buildings in Waxahachie, but the east side of their square had a really bad fire and damaged a lot of the buildings along the east side of the square. So all of that to say, the purpose of this was to kind of evaluate fire risk, but what it's done for us today is give us some really great information about what buildings used to be used for. And so here's a progression from 1900 on the left, 1905 in the middle, and 1916 on the right. And we can see you kind of have this center point with the courthouse that gives you kind of an orientation. But you can see we had a lot of yellow buildings around the square in 1900. And that's because there were a lot of wood buildings still around the square in 1900. Some of the buildings that we see today weren't there yet. And so they didn't come until a little bit after. You can see in 1905 that we had a little more blue. Not only is the blue darker because they used a different shade of blue to color in the map, but we just had more blue buildings, and you can see some of the building outlines have changed, or some of the buildings have been replaced with new brick or stone buildings. One of the things that you might not expect is if you look just north of the courthouse, right above where it says San Gabriel, there's a blank spot where downtown is missing some buildings. For a time, we had a lot of wood structures along the north side of the square. You can see that in the 1900 map on the far left. By 1905, a lot of those had been torn down and there were big gaps. And then if you look in the map on the far right, you can see these red buildings, kind of these brand new, considered more fire safe buildings. These brand new buildings were built to infill that. And so those had all been built by 1916. That's kind of a fun way to track the history and to see some of the changes that were made in our downtown. Also around that time, very shortly before the maps that are on my screen right now, Georgetown had gotten water and began to get the very beginnings of its sewer system. So water was pumped straight out of the San Gabriel River. You saw the water tower in an earlier photo, in the 1885 photo that was brand new at the time. And in a later presentation later this month, I'll tell you more about the history of that water tower. But there was a kind of a water company had formed privately first, and it was eventually sold to the city. But they pumped water out of the San Gabriel River. They got that first, and then they started to get sewer system. But before they got sewer system, and it's a little hard to see in these maps, there were a lot of private outhouses around the square and around downtown. And really funny story that I heard a judge tell this story, and so now I reshare this story. Really funny story that there was one public outhouse on the square. And so if you've ever been downtown for a long time and you're not a patron of a particular business or restaurant, you might have, where's a restroom that I can use? And so they had a lot of private privies, but they also had one public privy. But several people would put a lock on the public privy to try to claim it as their own so that other people couldn't use it. And I believe it was the county judge that had to kind of issue a decree that the public privy was to remain unlocked. Thankfully, they got sewer systems not long after that, began to be able to have kind of running water, sanitary sewer, toilets, things like that. But there's quite an interesting history about privies and privy cleaners in the city of Georgetown. Apparently, that was a job that could only be done kind of in the wee hours of the morning, so that it wasn't kind of a public spectacle of these privies being cleaned out. And you can get more information. I learned that information from the Williamson Museums. They have a lot of great history too, if you're interested in that. So I'd like to open it up for questions. If you are listening online, you can just type in the Q&A bar on the right if you have a question. And then also if you've called in, then you have the opportunity to unmute yourself or just kind of give us a heads up on your phone. I would be able to hear you if you're called in and you take yourself off of mute. So you can press *6 for that if you have any particular questions that I can answer. So I'll pause for a minute and see if anyone's got questions or need more information or is curious about any of the things I've talked about. So I'm not hearing any. We have a few more minutes, and what I would like to do is show you a little bit of a tour, if you will, of where you can see some of the things that I've talked about, get a little bit more in depth. So first, I'm going to go to our historic map. If you go to historic.georgetown.org, the page that you connected to our webcast from, you can scroll down and you can see a picture of a map, and it has a lot of colored dots on it. All you have to do is click on that picture. And this is really one of my very favorite things about our historic resources at the city of Georgetown. This is a really amazing map. So I'm going to scroll out or zoom out a little bit, and you can see, look at all these dots. So these are all identified historic structures in the city of Georgetown. If I zoom out a little bit more, you can see the dots continue. So sometimes there's a lot of information in this map. Sometimes it takes a minute to load. So just give it a minute and just be patient. Oh, looks like my screen share didn't quite work. Okay, so hopefully this is coming up online. And you should be seeing a map with a ton of color dots on it, showing all of our historic resources. And so if you want, you can use this address search bar up in the upper left to search for a particular address if you're doing research, or if you have a historic property or want to learn more about it. If you want to see if your property is listed on our historic resource survey list, that's a great way to find out. Or if you're just curious, for example, here is the school property. This is once was a Southwestern building. This is right here at University Avenue and South College. This was a Southwestern building. This was the first Georgetown High School. This is also an elementary school. This has a really incredible history. And so you can click on any of those colored dots, and it will give you a brief bit of information. It'll give you the address. It'll give you the estimated construction date. It'll give you the priority level. So we have high, medium, and low, or red, green, and blue dots. We've done 3 historic surveys, one in 1984, one in 2007, and the most recent in 2016. And then it'll tell you if it's in a historic district, if it's in a National Register district, or if it's individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It'll also give you some photos, but if you click where it says survey link and more info, if you click more info, this is the greatest thing, it'll take you to the survey information for that particular property. And it gives you additional information, what the building is, if it has a specific stylistic influence, what the construction year is, what the name is, and then it also gives you photos. And so this is a really great thing for you to check out some historic properties. And then this one also shows that this has a historic marker. And so you know that there's additional information that you can find out about the history of this school. And so every single property that has a dot on it will have a link with that kind of information, which is really fun and exciting. So it's a great way to do some research or to learn more. Or you can see their orange and purple dashed lines on the map, and those show our two historic districts. And so the orange district is our downtown historic district, and the purple district, which is bigger, is our Old Town historic district. If you own a property in either of these two boxes, then that property is subject to our special historic zoning regulations. So there are additional criteria if you do a new building, if you do an addition to a building, any kind of project work that affects the exterior. It's really great just to call and check with me first. I'd be glad to have a chat with you. That way I can see if you would need to go through our certificate of appropriateness process, and that just checks for design compliance to make sure that you meet our historic guidelines for those special areas. That helps us to protect our historic properties. So I'm available as a resource to help out with that, to answer any questions. You can also navigate over here on the right. You can turn on our National Register historic districts, and those, flee here in a second. Those should pop up. There we go. I will turn off the dots for a minute to make that easier to see. So we have 4 National Register historic districts in Georgetown. We have the Courthouse Historic District up here in the red. We have the Belford Historic District that was named after a very famous local builder named Charles Sanford Belford, and he built such high quality structures that we have an entire National Register Historic District named after him, because it includes a lot of houses that he built. But he has other houses and other buildings outside of that historic district in Old Town and in downtown Georgetown. In fact, he is the person who designed what is now the Georgetown Art Center. It used to be the Georgetown City Council Chambers and Fire Station, but he is responsible for the design for that. And then the old Masonic Lodge, where the Gumbo's restaurant is a building that he built. And so you can see similar styles in those buildings. So he's very, very well known, and that's one of the reasons he has his own National Register district here. And then we have the University Elm National Register district in the purple. And then we've got the Olive Street National Register district in the blue, and that's our most recent. And so there's some really wonderful old houses in the 3 kind of residential historic districts, and then our downtown district is really special. And one more fun thing, if you turn on the layer that has the purple star on it, you will see all of a sudden a bunch of purple stars pop up. And that just means these are the really special buildings. These are the really special places that have either a really significant history, and this might be a place that's so special that it is designated by the state of Texas as a state historic kind of property, or it might be individually listed on the National Register of Historic Places, which means it's so special that there's a national list of our important historic buildings, and it's on that national list. Or it could be a state antiquity, and we have 2 state antiquities in Georgetown. These are buildings that are not just designated as really historically special, but these are protected by state law. And so one is our courthouse. I'll zoom in. So the Williamson County Courthouse is a state antiquity. It is protected and regulated by the state. And so we've had several courthouses at this point, but the one that we have now is the one that we'll be keeping because the state has taken a special interest in that. And then the other one is the former agricultural depot. Ties to the railroad days, and so this is the other state antiquity that we have. Again, it's something that is so architecturally or historically special that the state of Texas had said, hey, that's really special to us, and we'll put that under our protections. And so you can check out the Texas Historical Commission's website if you're interested in state landmarks, state antiquities in that process. They've got some great information there. But the rest of the purple stars just indicate are really, really special historic structures, things that are worthy of great care, and things that have a special story. to them. You can see most of those are located within a historic district, but some are just outside.
Britton, we had a question come in about if somebody wanted to learn more about some of the people in Georgetown's history, where would be a good place to start?
Oh, that's a really great question. So Georgetown has a really, for a small town as we were for such a long time, Georgetown has a really incredible history of really creative, really clever, really wonderful people, and a lot of really fun stories too. And so my recommendation would be to check out a couple of places. If you're looking for histories of people, some of those stories are best captured by the Williamson Museum. And so I mentioned that they're doing a lot on their social media right now, doing live videos, telling histories, but they also know a lot of history about a lot of people. They have books in their gift store that you can purchase that give histories of Georgetown. So that's a great resource. And then also the Georgetown Public Library's Texas Reading Room. That's a great place to find more histories of Georgetown, including some of the people. Another really great resource, again, when everything starts to open back up and when we can start visiting collections again, I would check out the special collections at Southwestern University. They are absolutely fantastic. Not only is it just this wonderful repository of historic artifacts and books and records, but they also do a really excellent job telling stories of the people. And so they have a lot of theirs is either tied to Southwestern's history or Texas history, but a lot of people throughout Georgetown's history were Southwestern students. And so that provides some really fun information. And Southwestern has all of their yearbooks online, which is really exciting. So you can actually go through Southwestern yearbooks dating back to the early 1900s, at least, if not before then. And they've scanned all of those, and you can check that out. The Williamson County Historical Commission, so that's not just Georgetown, but it's all of Williamson County. They also have quite a bit of information. So they are transitioning their website right now, and they're in a process of moving a lot of their website content over. But they you can contact them, you can check their website out for that. Again, just Google search the Williamson County Historical Commission, and they are an excellent resource for information. So what I do a lot is the properties themselves, and a lot of times that means I know a little bit of the story of different people. But because I focus more on the buildings and more on the properties, I don't always know all of the best stories. So if I can help, I'm glad to, but those are also some really great resources for you to check out. And then Preservation Georgetown, too, they're a local nonprofit. They also, kind of look a lot at in taking care of the buildings, being great stewards of our historic buildings, but sometimes they know some stories about some of the people too. And then there's there are a lot of people in Georgetown who've been here for a very long time who know a lot of information. It's just kind of hard to get everybody together. That's where I would start. And really, I would probably start with the museum first, since they have a lot of that information, and they are a really great resource for people of all ages. They're very, very kid friendly too, and I think that's a wonderful thing for us to have just right down the street from me. Do we have any more questions that I can answer? So while we're waiting to see if there's any more questions, you can go to the National Park Service and look at the history of the National Preservation Act of 1966. It's not it's not looking terribly interesting because some of the images aren't showing up for me, but that was the initial act, the federal preservation legislation that LBJ signed, and that's gone through some iterations since that provide everything from tax incentives to other support for the preservation of historic structures. And then the UG Library Systems, their website with the Sanborn Fire Insurance maps, you can see A through Z for the state of Texas. So if you're from Georgetown, that's a really fun thing to look at. If you're from another part of Texas, you can check out, scroll down and see all the different maps. So Gainesville, for example, has a lot. Galveston has maps dating all the way back to 1877. And then Galveston goes, wow, they have a lot of sheets. So it looks like Galveston probably paid out a lot of money for their Sanborn maps. They've got a really huge collection. And so they go all the way to, looks like 1947. So that's pretty late for a Sanborn fire insurance map. But if you're from Galveston or enjoy vacationing there, or just interested, you could do kind of a deep dive and get really into the weeds on Galveston, it looks like. But just scroll down to Georgetown. We've got this great set. We started in 1885 with just one map sheet, just the downtown, and then by 1916 that had expanded out to 6 sheets. So sometimes I get to use these when I'm trying to understand the year that a structure was built. If it's hard to tell, if we kind of have a question, sometimes I get to use the Sanborn fire insurance maps to see if a building existed during that year or not.
Britton, we have time for just a couple more questions. Something I think that you will cover next week when we go through the certificate of appropriateness, but if you want to touch, there was a question about what happens if I have a building downtown that is not historic? What can I do with it?
That is a really good question. So I'm going to go back to our historic properties map and zoom in a little bit. And I'll bring back up all of our color dots. So you can see that for the most part in our historic districts, we have a lot of historic properties, but not all buildings in the historic district are historic buildings. And so I'll move over here. I'm showing our Georgetown Public Library. And so it doesn't have a dot on it because it's not a historic building. It's a nice building and it's a very wonderful library, but it's not historic and it's not on our list. But if you go just west where I am, we have a red dot on my building. So I'm in a high priority historic building here at the planning department, and they vary. And so if you have a building that's in a historic district, or it's in the orange box or the purple box, and it's not listed on our historic resource survey, then you don't have to follow quite as many kind of regulations on the protection of your building. You might still have to go through a design review process. Let's say you wanted to make an addition to your building. Just call me, email me, check in with me and see if you would need to go through the design review process before you get a building permit. Because the way that our process works and the way that we work to protect historic buildings is anytime you do work that requires a building permit, you go to get that building permit, one of the first things they check for is, are you in a historic district or not? And if you're in a historic district, then and you don't have a certificate of appropriateness letter saying that you've been approved for the design of your project, then they'll say, hey, you're going to need to talk to our historic planner. Please contact Britton and talk to her about your project before you go through your permit process. And so if you have a building that's not historic, you probably have fewer design review requirements for that. If you are building a brand new building in a historic district, even if it's just a new house, and you're in the historic district, you still have to go through our design review process because we want to make sure that any new buildings are consistent with the character of our historic district. They don't have to be pretend old buildings. They don't have to copy old buildings. We're just looking that they kind of fit in nicely and help retain the historic character that Georgetown really values and is really proud of. So we have a whole process for that. So if you have a building that's not historic and you need to make some alterations to it, feel free to check in with me and I can help you understand what that might look like. And if you have a historic property, different from that, if you have a historic property and maybe you're looking at some maintenance needs, or you've been working from home and you're looking in your backyard and you keep thinking, you know, it's about time I get around to that project, feel free to check in with me and make sure that if there are any kind of design review requirements, we can get those covered before you go on to get your building permit.
Great, thank you, Britton. The last question is, I think you covered it already, but is knowledge of my home's history required to submit an application for changes to it?
No, actually, and that's a really good question. So what's really helpful to me is if you already know something about your historic property, and if we can work together on that information. But if you have a historic property and you don't know the history of it, you don't know much about the style, you're not very familiar with the materials, that's one of the wonderful things about my job is I get to be a resource for our community in questions like that. So if you have never done research on a historic property before, I can help you get started. So whether or not you have a project, if you're just curious or just interested, I can help you get started. I can point you to some specific resources. I've shown a little bit today of what I do to get started, but there's a lot more that you can do. There are also organizations that can help you. So Preservation Georgetown is a great partner for his kind of historic property stewardship in our community. Preservation Georgetown has people who are very interested in and also have a lot of experience with understanding property histories, and they might even already know. And so they've done a lot of great work. They're the ones who have generously shared their records with the Georgetown Public Library. And so they provide some excellent resources as well. But always feel free to reach out to me, either call me or shoot me an email, and I'd be glad to help. And so if you are doing a project and you don't know your property's history, part of that review process usually is I'll help people understand any information that might be helpful to know that. And sometimes it's windows, and sometimes it's siding, and sometimes it's, well, why do I have this porch? Maybe it doesn't seem to match very well. Or I really like this thing, and I'd like to make sure when I build an addition, the styles match, and I can help you with ways to do that as well.
Great, Britton. That's it for all the questions that came in. We have about 5 more minutes left. I did want to share with those who are still with us a thank you for participating and joining us today. If you have any questions, we'd love for you to reach out to us at planning.georgetown.org or give us a call at 512-930-3575. We hope you can join us next week. It's going to be a fun one at noon, and just go to historic.georgetown.org to find out more. But Britton's going to cover what is a certificate of appropriateness and why do we have them, why do we love them, and when did Georgetown in the downtown have a 100-foot tall tower? So that should be an exciting presentation that Britton's going to give us some information on. Also want to share with those who are still with us that the Economic Development Department and Main Street program are hosting informative webinars this week on small businesses. They've got a great lineup of speakers presenting on topics that are relevant, timely, and educational for small business owners and managers. These workshops are free for all Georgetown businesses. Once you sign up, they'll send you an email with instructions on how to get into the meeting room. And each workshop is going to be about an hour. It includes a 45-minute information presentation plus 15 minutes of question and answer. And they have designed a great lineup this week, all week long. You can find out more by visiting the Facebook page that they signed up for. If you take a look in the right-hand side of the chat bar, I've placed their Facebook information there. So go to that event link, check it out, and we hope you can join us for that, as well as next week for the downtown 100-foot tower. Britton, is there anything else you want to share with our guests before we sign off?
That's all I have for today. But again, feel free to contact us throughout the week if you have any questions or things you'd like to see us address. You can always just email historic@georgetown.org, and that'll get to me too. But this was really enjoyable. I'm really looking forward to next Monday and sharing some more information with y'all. And I think next week we'll get more into the certificate of appropriateness process. How does that work? Where can you find out information about that? And I really enjoy the fact that we get to celebrate Preservation Month in a historic way. This is the first time that we've gone online for this. And thank y'all so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.